And welcome to my presentation on the 16 parts of the air brake system. Starting off, we have the air compressor, which pumps air into the storage tanks, and the governor, which tells the compressor when to start and stop filling the reservoir. Once the system reaches 125 psi, it cuts out, preventing any more air from being stored, and cuts in, allowing the compressor to begin again at 100 psi. The storage tanks, which hold the air needed for braking during your trips, are what I believe to be the most crucial component to your system. They can fill up with water and compressor oil, so it is vital that the drain valve is used to drain the tanks on a daily basis to prevent any air leakage or damage to the rest of your system. The alcohol evaporators that are used on some vehicles use alcohol to prevent ice formation in the storage tanks, especially during colder weather. They should also be drained daily and refilled as necessary, especially if you know that you'll be driving through colder climates. The importance of air pressure is evident in the different components that require it to run, such as the service brakes and the parking brake, which allow you to brake to avoid collisions. And although both systems lose air, I believe it drains faster using the brake pedal, since it's common practice for personal vehicles and anyone that drives. The foundation brakes, located at the ends of each axle, are the ones that apply the pressure to the brake drums, allowing you to slow the vehicle when you use your brakes. And while S-cams are the most common, they are not the only types, so it's important to check the setup in the vehicle that you're driving. Make sure you get acquainted and know how the brake works, and make sure that everything is working as it should. Also, with that, if the pressure were to drop too much, you do have another braking system, which are the spring brakes that actually apply automatically when the pressure is too low. And since the higher air pressure prevents them from being applied, they are held back by the higher pressure, so having that too low will release them and allow them to apply pressure to the brakes. Just as having too little air pressure is problematic, having too much is just as bad, going against the old saying that more is better. Luckily, the next part of your system, which is the safety valve, opens when your tank reaches 150 psi to prevent any damage and possibly putting your rig out of service. If that happens, have a mechanic check the problem. And the good news with that is that you do have a few gauges and warnings in your instrument panel that will give you a heads up before anything goes critical, such as the low pressure warning that will tell you when you have too little psi in the tanks and warn you when it drops too much. It will typically have a red light, and you may hear a buzzer on some of the vehicles you work on. One way to avoid hearing that is to keep an eye on the application pressure gauge and ensure you aren't using too much force to apply the brakes if it isn't necessary, as well as keeping an eye on the supply pressure gauge to keep you updated on how well your system is prepared to handle braking when you need to. Also, keeping an eye on the brake light and the stop light switch during your inspections is helpful, since it is one of the safety components that alerts other drivers that you are needing to brake or slow down, and it's activated anytime that you apply the brakes, so it's definitely important to keep an eye on that. On the subject of braking, brings me to the last two components of the air brake system, which would be the anti-lock brakes that would help you control your truck when braking by limiting the braking power on a hard brake. It prevents your wheels from locking up, and it's definitely helped when you need controlled braking. Fortunately, it does not work with stab braking unless your system is old enough to not have them installed, so like pre-1970s, 1975. So it does help prevent loss of control and skidding on the roads. And similarly, slightly similar, would be the front tire limiting valve that reduces braking power when you set it to the slippery position. So you don't want your maneuvering wheels to not be able to maneuver. So you don't need to have it on, but it is something to keep in mind as another tool in your arsenal to keep yourself and others safe. Conclusion: the air brake system has many features that require very acute monitoring to ensure safe arrival, and the storage tank plays a vital role since keeping the air readily available allows us to make the trips needed for our businesses and employers. Without it, how different would we be doing things? Stay alert, stay safe, and good night, everyone.